Hey everyone, I'm your fellow movie buff, and today we're going to be looking at my top Netflix recommendations based on 5 different categories. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, our first category here is going to be the obvious category. These are movies that are on Netflix that you should have already seen by now. They're absolute must-watches for anyone, but if you haven't, you need to see them as soon as possible. I'm not even going to talk about The Dark Knight because every single one of you watching should have seen this movie by now. It is the best comic movie ever made, comic book movie ever made. But the first actual candidate on this list is going to be Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Now, this is probably one of the most iconic comedies just ever made in general. It is just as funny as it is when it came out 40 plus years ago. This one came out in about 85, I believe it was. It's just a very big satire on the whole Middle Ages era, done by the British comedic group Monty Python, and it is probably their most famous movie. It even spawned its own musical, Spamalot, which ended up winning Best Musical at the Tonys. This just has a huge cult following, and for good reason. It is an absolute must-watch for anyone. Now, the second film on this category is going to be Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Now, this one, if you watched my video back in February for Valentine's Day, was my #1 romance-related movie, and for very good reason. I really enjoyed this one. It's about a guy named Scott who likes a girl named Ramona and has to fight her 7 evil exes in order to be able to date her. Overall, it's just an amazing action romance comedy. Now, the last one on this list, or I guess last 2 on this list, is the Conjuring movies, specifically Conjuring 1 and Conjuring 2. Now, these are probably the Conjuring movies, the most iconic and memorable modern horror franchise of today. I think there's probably, it is the only franchise that might be able to even come close to The Conjuring, but The Conjuring is so big that it really pales in comparison. These two, the first 2 Conjuring movies specifically, that were made before the spin-offs, are absolutely essential for any horror fan, and the whole haunted house take in these movies is just absolutely taken to a whole nother level by the mastermind that is James Wan. Alright, our second category here is going to be award-winning movies you've probably never seen, but definitely should be checking out. The first one here is going to be Klaus. This is a Netflix animated original movie. It came out back in 2019. It's in the family Christmas genre, but it is so much more than that. It got nominated for Best Animated Picture at the Oscars. I personally think it should have won over Toy Story 4, as much as I do love that movie. This was just an absolute just amazing movie. It's about a lazy son who's sent to work as a postman to collect 10,000 letters in a desolate island that doesn't even use the mail. And since it's Christmas related, you could probably see how that ties in. But everyone I've introduced this movie to absolutely loved it. But it is also a definite tearjerker. It made me even tear up, so definitely bring tissues if you consider watching this movie. Next up is Hunt for the Wilder People. Now, I watched this for the first time just actually a couple days ago with one of my friends for a movie night, and I am so glad that I did. This movie is directed by Taika Waititi, probably one of my favorite directors of all time. He directed my favorite movie, Jojo Rabbit, back in 2019, and this one came out in 2016. His style is just unmatched to any other director out there right now, and I'm not going to tell you anything about this movie except you have to watch it. You must watch this movie. It is one of the funniest, purest, make-you-cry movies I've ever seen, and it's just amazing. The final film in this category is going to be The Social Network. Now, this was nominated for Best Picture when it came out, and many think it got snubbed for Best Picture. It didn't end up winning. Many people think it should have. But this is a biopic about the story of Facebook and how it got started up by Mark Zuckerberg, who in here is played by Jesse Eisenberg, one of my favorite actors. And another one of my favorite actors, Andrew Garfield. I know he's a lot of your favorites. He plays Mark Zuckerberg's best friend in this movie, Eduardo. And if you are a fan of either of those actors, you should definitely check this one out. This is just a showcase of amazing acting and a riveting drama. So if you're into any of that, you should definitely give this one a watch. Our third category here is going to be Hidden Gems. Now, these are movies that you've probably never heard of or have received negative critical reception. However, for me personally, I absolutely adore these films, and I think they're highly underrated. The first film in this list is going to be Hush. This is a horror movie It is from my favorite horror director, Mike Flanagan. It is about a deaf woman being stalked by a serial killer. And it is definitely a smart horror movie, which is something that I really love. All the decisions made by the characters here absolutely make sense. They're the best decisions that could be made by these characters, and it's really nice to see that constant back and forth between this woman and the serial killer to be able to constantly make good decisions. It's probably one of my favorite horror movies ever in general, so you should definitely give this one a watch. Next up on the list is His House. Now, this is a Netflix original that came out back in 2020. It didn't really get a lot of buzz when it came out, but it is about a married couple who are also refugees moving into Great Britain, getting housed into their new home together. Now, this is kind of like a haunted house movie, but at the same time, not really, because the main focus of this movie is on this couple's culture, which I really enjoyed. This works great as a horror movie, and it actually contains a scene that is probably one of the most shocking scenes I have ever seen in a film. It left me absolutely awestruck, and at the same time, it also made me on the verge of tears because of how powerful this specific scene was. So if you were looking for an underrated horror movie, His House is definitely one you should watch. Last on the list of hidden gems is going to be Sherlock Holmes. Robert Downey Jr. stars as the titular British private detective, and I was personally very surprised by this movie. I wasn't really expecting a lot from it, but I had an absolute blast. This is a mystery at heart, but at the same time, it is very action-centric as well, and it pulls it off absolutely fantastically. Sherlock Holmes is not only a detective here, he is also ready to kick some butt when it comes to these villains and people he's getting mixed up with. But Sherlock Holmes is a super fun ride. Also stars Jude Law as Dr. Watson. So if you're into mysteries or action movies in general, you should definitely give this one a watch. Our fourth category on the list is going to be Give It a Chance. Now, the Give It a Chance category is going to be for movies that aren't the absolute best in the world. They do have their flaws, sometimes many, but for me, I still ended up really enjoying them. These are probably a little bit below the Hidden Gems category in quality or anything like that, but these Give It a Chance category movies are still a ton of fun to watch. So, without further ado, our first entry on here is going to be Real Steel. Now, this is a Rock'em Sock'em-like movie, if Rock'em Sock'em was a movie. It's about a bunch of gigantic metal robots that people control in a world where they can control them and they can make these giant metal robots fight each other. And the main character is Hugh Jackman, a previous pro-robot fighter, if you will, who ends up taking a mentoring role towards this young boy who is his son, and he ends up trying to teach him how to be this big, great, giant robot fighter. And it's all about that. Very crazy premise, but it ends up pulling it off quite well. The CGI might be a little bit cheesy at some times, but overall, it's a really solid movie that practically no one I've heard talk about. But if you are looking for a nice action movie with a little bit of heart in it, Real Steel is definitely for you. Next up is Circle. Now, this is probably the most simple premise I've ever seen in a movie, and it's pulled off extremely well. It's about a bunch of people from all age ranges, all races, all backgrounds, getting together in a circle formation, waking up in this circle formation, and they're each on their own individual circle. If you step out of your individual circle, you die. Every minute, someone dies. You can vote for people to die, and that's pretty much the premise. It's like a social experiment, but actually real and actually deadly in the confines of this fictional universe, obviously. But it is a very good social experiment kind of horror movie that you should definitely check out if you're bored on Netflix one day and want to have a little bit of fun with a nice underrated horror movie. Staying on the topic of horror movies, let's talk about probably the most popular B movie of all time, and that is Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Now, this movie came out in the late 80s, and it has since become a absolute cult classic in the horror genre. It is a horror comedy about killer clowns from outer space. All of it is practical effects. The costumes of the clowns are really great, sometimes funny, sometimes scary. Mostly, though, this is a comedy, although I will admit there is one specific scene that is genuinely frightening, and the kills are a little bit gory, but overall, this is just a really cheesy, fun, absolute, definite B-movie that definitely isn't trying too hard, isn't trying too little, but it's kind of like the perfect mix of cheesiness and seriousness that you would want from a horror comedy. If you want something that's wacky, zany, somewhat cheesy as a horror movie, with fun killer clowns in the mix, this one is definitely for you. Alright, our fifth and final category on this culmination of Netflix recommendations from myself, this category is going to be the so bad it's good category, or rather, so bad it might be good. It just depends on how you think of the movie. These are movies that are definitely not the best movies out there. They're even a cut below the give it a chance category, but there's just something there that is so funny, so terrible, that makes you laugh and makes you enjoy the movie anyways. Now the first movie on here is the only one in this category that I actually genuinely like, and that is Good Burger. If you were not familiar with Good Burger, you probably weren't a 90s or 2000s kid, because Good Burger was a cult classic from that time. It's a Nickelodeon original movie that's really only basic premise is two guys that work at a burger shop and just their crazy daily antics. A bunch of stupid comedy in it. Obviously was made for kids, but for me personally, I love it and I still love it. I haven't checked it out in forever, but I really want to watch it again soon now that I'm talking about it. But if you're in for a really just stupid comedy that was obviously intended for kids, but still is just as funny for teens and adults, definitely check out Good Burger. Next on here is Vampires vs. the Bronx. Now, this is one I'm a little bit conflicted on because I do kind of like it and I also kind of don't like it at the same time. The plot is in the title. It's about a group of kids in the Bronx who figure out a bunch of vampires have come into the neighborhood and they have to figure out how to get people to believe them and hopefully defeat the vampires. This one came out last year on Netflix as an original, and there's a few really cheesy special effects here, especially with the vampires, that make me dislike this movie a little bit more. I know some, especially one of my best friends, he absolutely adored this movie, so you might like this more than me. That's why I'm putting it on this category. But if you are into horror or vampires or just some nice, fun, cheesy movies, Vampires vs. the Bronx is definitely one you'll enjoy watching. The last film on this list and the last film of the video is going to be Shorts. Now, this is one that I personally hated when I watched it. I didn't like it at all, but some of you might really enjoy it, and here's why. Many people who have seen this movie think it's underrated, and the reason is the director behind this movie is Robert Rodriguez, the same guy who brought us the Spy Kids franchise and Shark Boy and Lava Girl. And as many of you know, lots of us grew up on those movies as a kid. Lots of us adore those movies still to this day. And if that's you, you're probably gonna like Shorts. This is a series of shorts, hence the title, that are connected together about these miniature aliens. And besides that, it kind of gets a little bit confusing with all these different kid characters and everything. But overall, it's the same wacky, zany, cheesy edits that you'll see from Spy Kids and Shark Boy and Lava Girl. So if you like those movies and you're in for a really weird and wild ride, you'll probably like Shorts. Alright guys, I know that was a lot of movies to talk about at once, but hopefully you enjoyed this video. I know it was one that you guys picked out yourselves. Hopefully through this slew of Netflix movie recommendations, you're able to find just a couple that you will end up watching and enjoying. If that's the case, definitely DM me. If you watch any of these movies on this list that I've given, definitely let me know your thoughts on them. I'd love to hear it. But that is all I've got for today, guys. Hope you're having an amazing day, and I'll see you next time.